Welcome to Keep Going, a podcast about failure and success, hosted by John Biggs. Every week, we talk to an amazing person about a time they failed and what they learned. And remember, when you're going through hell, keep going.
Welcome back to Keep Going, a podcast about success and failure. I'm John Biggs. Today on the show, we have Stefan Lindström. He's a speaker and behavioral scientist. He's also the creator of the Entrepreneur Profile Test. Welcome, Stefan.
Thank you, John.
Yeah. So I looked at your profile. I went through a few things, and I'm familiar with your speaking. But I think it would be super valuable just to understand where you come from a behavioral standpoint, looking at entrepreneurship. And I think that's kind of important to people, right? So just to understand like the psychology of the entrepreneur. So why don't you talk a little bit about that?
I started after my time in 2005, at Boston University Entrepreneurial Program. I went back to Sweden and start doing research on entrepreneurs and entrepreneurial behaviors, which led to that we launched the Entrepreneur Profile Test in 2010, which was founded by the Swedish Enterprise Federation to improve entrepreneurship in Sweden.
Okay, so that's an interesting question. So what was different about entrepreneurship in Sweden? What's different about entrepreneurship in Europe in general than, let's say, Boston, right?
Entrepreneurship is actually one thing that I think is quite global. It's not a male thing. It's not a female thing. It's not American or European or anything like that. That's what I think is one of the benefits, because entrepreneurship for me is neutral. But one could say when it comes to environments, there's a big difference between America or USA and Europe.
Okay, so what was needed back in 2010 in Sweden to improve entrepreneurship?
The whole thing was I launched the sixth entrepreneurial archetype from my research, and the other five they're from MIT in Boston. And then I got an interview for the Swedish magazine Entrepreneur, and the guy Niklas Mattsson, who was the chief editor. Mm-hmm. He asked me and he said, but you're working as a management consultant or HR consultant. What kind of different patterns do you see between if a CEO is hired or if the CEO is an entrepreneur? And I said, I noticed the difference between if you're going to improve a business with an external CEO, you can do that by, doing sales technique for the salespeople or whatever. But when it comes to entrepreneur-driven companies, is that you have to train and improve the entrepreneur as well. It doesn't work otherwise. And that was the conclusion of the Swedish Federation of Enterprise. And they said, oh my goodness, we have came to the same conclusion. And then they came back to me and said, how can we improve entrepreneurs or entrepreneurship in Sweden? And I said, it usually goes to improve the entrepreneur. And how do we improve the entrepreneur? And we came to the conclusion that it has to do with self-insight and self-awareness. So the EPT test is based on improved self-awareness and self-insight.
What does that mean, self-awareness, especially in this context?
Self-awareness could be seen as I notice that I react like this in a situation like this, or whatever the situation is. Self-insight is more of knowing why I react or why I don't react or maybe even respond. So awareness is that you notice, like I'm getting mad or I'm getting angry or I'm getting upset or something like that. The self-insight is more like I know why this upsets me.
How do you build that into your character? How do you create that sort of insight, I guess, before you become an entrepreneur? Or can that be trained? Can you learn? What's the behavioral patterns do you need to follow to begin thinking that way?
Do you mean what kind of patterns or insights do you need to become an entrepreneur? Or
therapy, education? What sort of things do you think are the best tools for a early entrepreneur?
Entrepreneurs usually just act on some kind of, we call it stimuli. Psychiatrists might call it impulsivity. But they have a tendency to spot something, which usually called an ID, and that idea is usually connected to a problem of which the entrepreneur thinks that they have a solution. So they are they're a little bit full of themselves or selves, which is understandable because they're supposed to be. Because if you're not full of that idea, you don't have what it takes to break the market. And the entrepreneurial ideas, they are like children. Everybody loves their own. Yeah.
How do you break that? How do you break that habit of loving your own? How do you kill your darlings, as it were?
Yeah, that's the hard part, because an entrepreneur, they have to be a little bit like, this is my idea, this is my child, so to speak, or so that's one of their drivers. But sometimes it could be a benefit of making a little bit of a gap or a distance between the idea and the solution, and a little bit more listen to the market, listen a little bit more to the customer, a little bit more of taking external input, less narrow-minded maybe.
Mm-hmm. I think there's a lot of cultural differences, especially in European versus American, and we could also argue that there's probably a cultural difference between like a Swedish entrepreneur and a German entrepreneur. What are some of the ways that you can encourage somebody who's maybe reticent to talk, right? Somebody who doesn't like to pitch, somebody who doesn't like to talk. How do you encourage them to break that cultural and that doing the things that they need to do to become an entrepreneur?
Americans, I don't know, maybe it's the same with the Canadians, I don't know, North America, but just to USA. One of the benefits of being American is that you are trained in school to do public speakings, and we don't have that in our school system. Americans are always great. First of all, you guys have the language, and we're not native English, right? And the Germans are not either native English. But Americans are trained to do, Americans are more, I would say, sales-orientated, competition-orientated. The competition is much harder within the USA than it is in Europe, maybe due to the different welfare system or the good old American. You were from New York. I think there's a song, "You can make it here, you can make it anywhere," or something like that, isn't it? Frank Sinatra or something.
I guess, yeah. If you can make it in New York, you can make it in Stockholm, I guess, maybe.
Yeah. And I would say if you can make it in Stockholm, that's not for sure that you can make it in New York. But I mean, it's in American, what do you say, legacy or heritage, that you have that entrepreneurial mindset, and Europeans or European entrepreneurs, they have to train on sales pitch. And doing an elevator pitch and things like that. And the only way, and the best way to do that is, practice, and especially in the USA. You guys are great on that.
I mean, we try, but we're also talk a lot, so that's the other issue, and don't get stuff done. So yeah, so tell me about some experiences that you've had working with entrepreneurs. What kind of things are you able to turn around for folks and improve?
Could you rephrase that question, please?
What sorts of things do you recommend to the startups that you work with? How do you communicate with them? What do you tell them that they need to help? Like you said, people need help with sales, right? So how do you communicate how to be the better salesperson to a beginner entrepreneur?
I usually, it depends a little bit on which are. Through the EPT test, we figure out which archetype they are most likely to be. And some of them are a little bit more introvert, some of them are a little bit extrovert, some of them are ID driven, some of them are a little bit more market driven, etc., etc. But when it comes to entrepreneurs, is that, if I understand your question right, is that they lack of having a sales process.
Soft skills, let's call it, right? Soft skills.
Yes, soft skills. It's about oral communication. It's about sales, yes, to make it. They might have a great idea, they might have a great product, but they don't really know how to enter the market. That's especially in Sweden. And you talked about Germany, but Germans and Swedes are quite similar when culture-wise.
Mm-hmm. In terms of how entrepreneurs should start, what do you think is the best way for somebody who doesn't have soft skills? What do they need to get started? I mean, right now, having hard skills is actually kind of a detriment, right? Like knowing how to code is no longer, unfortunately, a barrier to creating an MVP, to creating a product. So what sort of soft skills, and how do you train those soft skills to become a better entrepreneur?
It's usually, I might be biased here, but I think that I have come and I've talked to so many, we have done over 36,000 EPT tests, and I have done over 15,000 feedback sessions with people who had done the EPT test since 2010. Usually boils down to where we begin this conversation. A little bit of self-insight and a little bit of self-awareness. That's what it really boils down to. It might sound boring. It might sound that I'm biased. You always find what you're looking for. But we have really tried to emphasize and really try to look at it from different perspectives and different archetypes and different kind of behaviors. And some people also have a little bit of a repetitive behaviors, which is quite interesting, because successful entrepreneurs have a tendency to maintain successful, and people who don't become as successful also have a little bit of a tendency to not succeed. We call it repetitive behaviors.
How do you break repetitive behaviors like that?
First of all, that's a very interesting question, Jan. If I could answer that, that would be $1 million answer. Or maybe the Nobel Prize, which is around the corner of where I live. But the Nobel Committee. First of all, one has to recognize that is a repetitive behavior. And I've seen that the ones who could fix that, they are usually, not always, but usually they have the ability to see, like, for example, it's the same people who come late to meetings. It's the same people who makes the save stats. It's the same people who, I don't know, score a playoff goal in ice hockey, etc., etc. So we all have repetitive behaviors. Do you agree on that?
Sorry, you just froze for a second. Can you just ask that last question, and then I'll discuss that.
Yeah, I said we all have repetitive behaviors, right? And it's the same people who usually come late. It's the same people who usually come first to meetings. It's the same people who, etc., etc., etc. And the reason for that is something called traits, which is personality traits. You can refer to, for example, the Big Five. If you're probably aware of the Big Five, right?
I've heard it. I've heard folks talk about it. Why don't you run through them real quick?
Big Five is, as far as the research or science agree until today, and the last years, is that it seems to be five personality traits that we are more or less born with, and it's openness, extraversion or introversion, openness, extraversion, agreeableness, conscientiousness, and something called neuroticism. I don't know the exact word for that. Neurotic?
Neuroticism.
Thank you.
Neuroticism, yeah.
Yeah, that's a hard one for a sweet to say. And you have more or less of this, for example, and I've done some research, and when it comes to personality traits, since you were bringing that up, openness is the biggest. What do you say? Biggest
indicator.
Thank you. The biggest indicator of successful or for entrepreneurs.
So that's actually a super interesting point. So the idea of all those other things, agreeableness, etc., they might suggest something to be a better employee. But something like openness would suggest being a better entrepreneur. And neuroses obviously is I suspect is probably a detriment if you're working in a space as well.
Yeah, because openness really stood out in not only my or others' research about openness. Is a really I know even what was the Canadian researcher Jordan B. Peterson. He also says that openness is the biggest indicator of entrepreneurship. Our research is when it comes to agreeableness, entrepreneurs are on the same level as the average. So which is quite interesting. It's the middle of the road that, okay, you have to agree with the customer to a certain point, right? But you cannot go too far and say, oh, never mind the price. You can have a nice price.
Yeah.
You can have discount. So agreeableness is on the same level as the common population, both in US and in Sweden. And openness is the biggest indicator. Extroversion is the second one.
Are there ways to improve those factors, or are we basically stuck? What does the research say?
The research, it depends on who you ask. But the research, if you ask psychologists, psychiatrists, and people who work with that, maybe even myself included, it seems like those personality traits are something that we are born with. I used to refer to people who have watched dogs or cats when they get children, and the mom is in the corner with all the kids. There's always, if you walk towards your house cat, there's always the same little one who comes first and said hello. There's always somebody hiding behind the back of the mother, right?
Mm-hmm.
So these personality traits it seems like that we are born with them. I think when it comes to openness, you can train that a little bit with something called a growth mindset versus a fixed mindset.
Mm-hmm.
So that is something that can be improved.
So a growth mindset. Interesting. Okay. If you were an entrepreneur, starting out right now in 2026, given everything we know about AI, personality traits, etc., what would you do to build a business right now?
To be honest with you, I don't know, because I hear and I think that I see there is so much uncertainty right now. Not only because of AI, there's energy crisis, there's a war, there are wars, etc., etc. So the market seems to be, I don't know, what do you say, uncertain?
Uncertain, sure. Yeah.
Maybe, yeah. And it doesn't really seem to, and also if you look at the VC, the venture capital market, it seems to be the same thing. Everything, I spoke to someone who actually used the English word, and I said, how is the market? And he said, frozen.
Mm-hmm.
And I said, yeah. So it's, on the other hand, if the market is always the same, there are usually no opportunities for entrepreneurs. So it's when the market is changing, that's where the openings usually, what do you say, pop up or come.
Sure.
Yeah. So, because if the market is like this, right, which is more or less like, like a socialist country, like, okay, what can we do here, right? Every day is like a Tuesday. But so when things are uncertain, when things are changing, the change within itself leads to opportunities, and opportunities is the what do you say, grow ground for entrepreneurship?
Sure. It's like it's the potting soil. It's the garden for entrepreneurship. Let's say that.
It's the garden for entrepreneurship. Yeah. Exactly.
Very cool. All right. Well, one thing that I noticed was that I'm fascinated by there's almost like a cynicism, which I would associate with kind of like Northern Europe, Poland, that sort of thing. But I also think that your view of the being in flux is an important aspect for the entrepreneur, because if everything was flat, there's no quote unquote money to be made. There's no innovation to be created. I don't like to talk about the cash associated with entrepreneurship. I like to talk more about the innovation created. And I think we're on the cusp of fairly interesting innovations in AI and also defense tech, which is, for better or worse, is going to be a big thing over the next few years.
Yes, because it changes, or maybe one could say it shakes our foundations. That is usually, it ends up, that's the big thing with entrepreneurs, that they are not afraid of, average Joe or average Swede go, oh my goodness, AI is going to take our jobs, and they're going to, Volvo and Ericsson are going to leave the country, or, yucky. But that's not Because when it comes to, something shakes your, foundation, there's always some entrepreneurs who say, hang on a minute, I know, we can, how about? And that's the greatness with entrepreneurs, because entrepreneurs have more tendency to solve problems.
Mm-hmm.
Politicians don't solve.
Politicians don't solve them, they create them.
No, well, that's, I might be a little bit more polite. I would say entrepreneurs solve problems and politicians just rearrange them.
Okay. That's a nice way to do it. All right, Stefan, where can folks find out what you're working on?
My homepage, or
StefanLindstrom.com, right?
StefanLindstrom.com, or they can also go through the entrepreneurial profile test.com, or as we say, EPT.
Okay. All right.
I know EPT can also stand for two other things. Yeah. When we registered that, we saw that, talking about listen to the market, we saw that it was also two other. English proficiency test is another thing.
Oh, English proficiency test. All right.
Yeah,
well,
proficiency test.
Well, you have the whole name here, so it's entrepreneurprofiletest.com.
Entrepreneur profile test.
Click there, and you can get all that together. So this was fascinating, and I think this is really nice. This is a nice departure, because I never really speak to European entrepreneurs and entrepreneur experts. So this is, I think this adds a lot to the conversation here. All right. Well, thank you, Stefan. This has been cool.
Thank you very much indeed, John. And thank you very much for today.
This has been Keep Going. I'm John Biggs. We will see you next week. Thank you for listening to Keep Going, a podcast about success and failure. Remember, Keep Going is entirely listener supported. If you're listening to this, please head over to keepgoingpod.com, where you can subscribe to the podcast for as little as $5 a month. This is a labor of love, and every little bit helps. Thanks for listening.